Canning meat is a great way to preserve any kind of meat for later use. If you're an avid hunter and you've had a successful hunting season, canning meat is a great way to preserve that meat for later use. Or if you've found meat on sale at your local grocery store, or if you've grown animals on your farm and you're using that meat for your family use. Canning is a great way to save it for later use. And if you've run out of freezer space, this is another good reason to do this. So you want to start with really lean meat. For example, these meats that I have right here, this is beef. Stew meat is what this is. Canning is a great way to use meat that's less tender, those tougher cuts of meat, because the canning process will make that meat fork tender in the end. So you want to start with really lean meat. You can see some of these pieces here have some fat on them. So we'll want to take those and trim off excess fat that's on there, or any tough parts like the gristle, or if you see any bruised spots on the meat. Trim those off. Any excess fat can interfere with the seal in the end, so the leaner the better in this whole process. All right, get this one more piece here, and we'll call that good. So the instructions to use for canning meat today that we're using comes from the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. We're using the processing methods to can meat in cubes, chunks, or in strips. There are instructions to can meat in other ways, such as ground meat. There's also instructions for canning poultry products, rabbit, and fish products. So today we're going to be canning beef. We've got our meat all trimmed up. Now there's two ways that we can do this. We can do a raw pack method or a hot pack method, and we're going to do both today so that you can see both methods. Pretty simply, on a raw pack method, we basically just put the meat in the jar. If you want to add any salt, you can do that. You want to use canning salt, which is pure salt, and you add a half a teaspoon per pint or a teaspoon per quart. Salt is just for flavor. There's no preserving qualities coming with the salt for the meat, so it's just to add flavor. So you could leave it out if you so choose. So for a raw pack method, we simply take the meat and put it in the jar, and you want to fill the jar pretty loosely. You need to leave some space in there so that during the canning process, this will create its own juice, and the heat will go through the jar more efficiently if you leave just a little bit of space in between the meat pieces. It takes about between 1 and 2 pounds to fill a pint jar. So today we're using just about 1 pound. And we want to fill this to have 1 inch of headspace. So we'll use our headspace measuring tool, which is this, and we'll set this on the rim of the jar at that point. And I'm going to squish that down just a little bit. And that's about 1 inch headspace. So that's where we want that. So now we've got our jar filled. Now we need to apply the lid. First thing we want to do is just make sure that the rim of the jar is clean. So we use a paper towel and wipe that off. And then we're ready to apply the lid. And these lids have been warmed in hot simmering water. You could leave them cold. The lids do not have to be warmed. If you do warm them up, you just don't want to boil them, because boiling will soften the red sealing compound too much, and then they may not seal at all. Then we're ready to apply the ring, and we screw this down until what we call finger tight. Basically, the ring stops moving, and then we're ready to put that jar in the canner.
Nex-Tech Cloud Phone goes where you go. In the office, perfect. Checking cattle, you're connected. Virtual meetings, covered. In the field, absolutely. CloudPhone is perfect for the small business, and here's why. They're cost-effective, reliable, scalable, secure, and mobile. If you're up for freedom and saving money, now's the perfect time. Sign a qualified CloudPhone contract and don't pay for 90 days. Call Nex-Tech and ask about CloudPhone systems today.
So now I'm going to show you how to do the hot pack method for our meat today. So I've got a skillet warming here on fairly high, about medium-high heat, and I'm going to add a little bit of cooking oil to the pan so our meat doesn't stick. And then we're ready to add our stew meat. So basically what we're doing here is just browning the meat. We only need to cook it until about rare, medium rare, which is about 145 to 150 degrees. So I have my thermometer here, so we'll check the temperature of this after it browns a little bit on the bottom. And this will help add some flavor to this. Now, as you're prepping your meat and getting it ready to go and you're getting the canning process ready, you want to try to keep it cold. Keep it in the refrigerator until you're ready to put the meat into the jars, whether you're doing the raw pack or you're ready to cook it for the hot pack. So our meat has reached its temperature, and now we can get this prepped to put in a hot pack method jar. Back here on this burner I have some hot water going. You can use meat broth, especially if you have meat that you cut off the bones. You can use the bones to make beef broth out of this, or whatever kind of meat you're canning. Or you could use a commercial beef broth if you wanted to, or you can just use plain water. So today we're just using plain water. So now that we've got our meat cooked, we're ready to pack it into our hot jars. So over here in my canner, I have some jars heating up. So I'll pull one of these out. And I'll use the funnel. This will help you get your meat into the jar easier. We'll use this instead. And you can put some of that meat juice in there. You don't want that to go to waste. And again, if you want to add salt, you can. It is optional. The salt is just for flavor. And but if you would like to leave it out, you certainly can. So you want to fill your jars. We're looking for 1 inch of head space. So we'll use our headspace measuring tool, and again 1 inch is over here. And that's about where we're at for the meat. We're going to add some extra water to this, and then double check our headspace again. And the water will help in the hot pack method. With the extra juice, you get a little bit better quality product in the end because the meat is going to be completely covered with juice. You want to use your bubble freer to make sure that we don't have any excess air inside the jars, and it'll help you push your meat down inside the jar. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. It helps those pieces fit together. And then we can remeasure our headspace. Okay. All right, we're pretty good. So we're ready to put the lid on. And once again, we want to wipe off the rims of our jars, make sure they're good and clean. And we'll use our lid wand to get a lid out of the hot water and place it on top of the jar. And we'll add our ring. And if your jar is still pretty hot, it's a good idea to use a pot holder. And you screw it down just until the ring stops. And that's what we call finger tight. And now we're ready to put them into the canner.
At United Way of Ellis County, we believe education spans from cradle to career. It is through programs such as youth mentoring, parenting education, and financial literacy that we encourage the importance of education as a cornerstone for success. Access to education allows for higher earning potential and a more engaged community. The path to success begins early, and at United Way, we fight for the community's health, education, financial stability, and most importantly, you. Anyone can make a difference. Join our fight towards a better community today.
So here, our 2 jars of beef are ready to go in the canners. I wanted to mention first that if you were canning venison or any kind of wild game type meat, what helps tame the gamey flavor of that type of meat is to soak your meat in a salt brine solution for an hour, or you could also can those products in tomato juice, and that will help tame that gamey flavor. So for canning meat, we have to use a pressure canner. And I have 2 types of pressure canners here. I'm only going to actually use one of them. This is a dial gauge canner, and the one that I'm going to use is called a weighted gauge canner. So in pressure canning, we only need to have 2 to 3 inches of water in the bottom of the canner. So you can use a ruler to measure that, to make sure you're at that level. Always refer to your manufacturer's instructions to make sure you have the proper amount of water. The other thing that is a good idea to add is about 1/4 cup of vinegar, and this will help keep your jars clean, prevent any hard water deposits from making a film on the outside of your jars, and it cleans up your canner. So now we're ready to put the jars in. And then we want to leave a little bit of space. Even I've only got 2 jars in here, but if we had a full canner load, we would want to leave a little bit of space between the jars so that the steam gets completely around all of the jars. All right, our jars are in the canner and we're ready to put the lid on. And the lid only goes on one way on these canners. So there's an arrow on the lid and an arrow on the handle, and you match those up and then you twist the lid on. So our lid is on the canner, and at this point we have to wait for the pressure and the heat to start building. And this stem here is called the vent, and we have to watch for steam, a full blast of steam, to start coming out of the canner. And then we will time that steam for 10 minutes. This helps push the air out of the canner, gets it good and hot, builds the steam up inside the canner, and that way your pressure will build up properly. If you skip this step, your canner is not going to get up to the pressure that it should, and you'll be under processing your products. This type of canner over here is a dial gauge canner, and again we have to wait for the steam to come out of the vent, and we will time that for 10 minutes.
It's about caring for the people we serve.
We're neighbors.
We're friends.
We are fellow Kansan.
We've got the best minds working on our network because you deserve the latest technology.
You can count on us to be there with our local customer care.
We don't settle for less than the newest devices, plans, and accessories at honest prices.
We're proud of our roots and excited about the future.
We're keeping Kansans connected.
So our timer has gone off and our 10-minute time for exhausting the canner is over. So now we can put our weights and our counterweights on. On our weighted gauge canner for our altitude, we have to use 15 pounds of pressure. And for this particular canner, this comes in 3 parts. This is the 5-pound weight. You add a ring, that's 10 pounds. And you add the second ring, and that's 15 pounds. So this, we just come in from the side and cover the vent. On the dial gauge canner, we use this weight, which is called a counterweight, and we will come in from the side on that and place that on top of the vent. As you can see in the front of these canners, there's 2 valves that have popped up. These are pressure indicator valves, and they also lock the lid onto the canner. This is one of several safety features that are on these newer models of canners that are out today. There's on the back side, there are small black plugs on the top of the lid. Those are overpressure plugs, so in case our pressure would spike, those plugs will pop out, and then you'll get an immediately release of pressure inside. So that's another safety feature. And again, the lid only goes on one way, so that's the third safety features on both of these canners. So we've got pressure building up in here. On our weighted gauge canner, we have to wait for this to start gently rocking, and then we can start counting our processing time. On our dial gauge canner, we need to get this up to 11 pounds of pressure for our altitude. And then we can start counting the processing time for that. The amount of pressure that you use for the type of canner you have should be indicated in your recipes. It will tell you if you have a weighted gauge canner, you will use either 5, 10, or 15 pounds based on your altitude of residence. So for example, for this one, for canning meat, the weighted gauge pressure that we need to use for 0 to 1,000 feet is 10 pounds of pressure. If you're above 1,000 feet, you would have to use 15 pounds of pressure. So today we're in Manhattan, Kansas. We're just above 1,000 feet. We are using 15 pounds of pressure. On our dial gauge canner, we can fine tune it a little more. We will use 11 pounds of pressure because on the recipe, it will state for a dial gauge canner, 0 to 2,000 feet, you need to use 11 pounds of pressure. So at this point, we need to monitor how the pressure is building, and we can adjust how the pressure is working with our burners. When it gets close to where the pressure needs to be, we can usually turn the burners down. You don't want to leave them on high throughout the whole process because the pressure will keep building. So you have to try to maintain a steady pressure as much as you possibly can. The other reason you want to do that is if the pressure fluctuates too much, you could end up siphoning juice, food particles out of the jar, and it'll seep outside of the jar into the canner. And then when you're done, you'll lose a lot of liquid, and it'll look like the liquid has gone out of the jar. So again, we'll watch for this one to start to gently rock, and we'll wait for this one to get to 11 pounds. So our weighted gauge is up to pressure and the weight has started to rock gently. And this is about the tempo that you want to see the weighted gauge to jiggle. So we've started our process time, and again, this is pints, and we want to go for an hour and 15 minutes, otherwise known as 75 minutes. If we had quarts in here, we would go for an hour and a half or 90 minutes. And we want to maintain this steady, gentle rock throughout that whole processing time. So again, you don't want to walk away. You can do other things in your kitchen. You just have to listen. Make sure you still hear this rocking. If it starts to jiggle a lot faster than this, your pressure is getting too high, so you need to turn down your burner. On the other hand, if it stops jiggling, then your pressure's dropped down too low. Then you need to restart it, get it back up, and you need to restart your processing time. So that's another important key to make sure that you're paying attention to what your canner is doing. Okay, our dial gauge has reached the pressure that we want. It's at 11, and in fact, it's a little bit over 11. So now we can start our process time, which would be an hour and 15 minutes for pint jars. If we had quart jars in here, it would be 1 hour and 30 minutes. During the process time, this counterweight should stay steady. We want to try to keep the pressure steady. We just have to monitor it. You don't want to walk away from these canners. You want to make sure you're in the vicinity, still in your kitchen, watching the pressure, because it could fluctuate a little bit. And again, you want to use your burner to monitor and adjust your temperature and keep your pressure at its steady point.
The team at Homestead Assisted Living is a proud supporter of the Hayes community. Located just west of the Sternberg Natural History Museum, Homestead is a warm and welcoming community where residents receive compassionate care from licensed professionals. If you're curious about senior living options for yourself or a loved one, make Homestead your first call. Our kind and courteous staff would love to show you around and answer any questions you may have. Call us today to schedule a tour of Homestead or visit us online at homesteadofhayes.com.
So our hour and 15 minutes processing time is done. So now we can turn the burner off. And at this point, we will wait for the pressure to drop. The weight is going to slowly stop jiggling, and then we have to wait for our pressure indicator valve to drop, and then we can take the lid off. This will take about 30 minutes. It depends on how full your canner is. On our dial gauge canner, when the processing time is done, we want to just turn the burner off, and we let the pressure drop on its own. You do not want to force cool these canners, because that will cause the jars to siphon product and liquid outside of them, and it could also cause the jars to crack. Too much of a temperature change can cause them to crack. So we just leave them set. We leave the weight on and wait for the needle to drop down, and then we also have to wait for this pressure indicator valve to drop down also in order to take the lid off.
At Next Generation, we're working to keep kids local, and you can help. Your gift of any amount provides opportunities for high school and college students to experience local careers with local businesses right here at home.
Opportunities for paid internships that teach students about their local community and prepare them with hands-on job skills now, so they are ready to remain local for the future.
Like me in Plainville.
Like me in Phillipsburg.
Students like me in Waukene.
Okay, our pressure canner has dropped its pressure, and now we can open it. One reminder is this weight here on the top of the lid Whether you're using a weighted gauge or a dial gauge canner, you want to leave this weight on the vent tube until it's completely dropped its pressure. If you take it off too soon, the pressure is going to release suddenly, and you could break your jars or at least siphon liquid and food pieces out of the jars. So you want to leave the weight set as it is. So now that our pressure indicator lock has dropped, we can safely take the pressure weight off, set that off to the side, and we can open up the canner. You always want to open your lid away from you because there's a lot of steam and you don't want to burn your face. Okay, after you've removed the lid, you want to let your jars set inside the canner for an extra 5 minutes. And again, this will help let the steam get out of the way, it'll help the water calm down, and it's an extra assurance that your lids are going to seal. So our 5 minutes have passed, and now we can take the jars out. This one that I'm taking out here was the raw packed meat. And then this one is the hot packed meat. And you can see that in the raw pack, we've lost a lot of volume from the meat in the jar. And so we do have quite a bit of headspace there. But we started out with the right headspace, and that's what's important. As the meat cooked, it shrunk, and then it created its own juice. The hot pack meat still has its proper amount of liquid in it. You can see that both of them are bubbling pretty vigorously at this point, just because it's still hot. So you want to let these set to cool undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours until they're completely cool. And then you can store them in a cool, dry, dark location. We recommend that any canned food, including meat, be used within 1 year for best safety and for best quality. You want to, after they've cooled, you want to remove the rings, clean up your jars to remove any residue or any product that may have come out of the jars, and that happens every once in a while, but the product's still going to be safe because you've processed them properly. You can take the rings off and leave them off, but if you choose, you can leave them on. These will make a great ready-to-eat meal that you can easily put together in a short amount of time for your family.